That's my phone.
That's where she commenting on the chat. You might want to ask Coco too, then she's kind of, you're out.
I realize a lot of people on this chapter are over 60 and can't read that.
I was even put on there.
Yeah, I'll be for 60 soon, so.
Okay.
You have to increase your magnification.
All right, we're going to get started. It is 6:31. And this is a work session for the CPAC to review the environmental chapter, which we haven't had a chance to do yet. So this is our first review of it, and we're going to be putting in comments and notes. Noah from BFJ is going to join us around 7, but Emily is already on, so she works with Noah. So any questions we have for them, we can address. Hey, Emily, we can, bring those up when everybody's there. So we're going to get started with the minutes from our last meeting, April 17th. Did everyone get a chance to look them over? Any questions, comments, changes?
One small correction. Zoom attendees, I think Kim's last name is Noland.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, this is a NIT member Kerr chapter. It says comprehensive panhole, so it just needs to be planned. That's minor spell check. And the only other thing I would say is as we were talking about efficiencies, not just on communication, but what should the structure overall be? We kind of talked about roles, responsibilities. That was missing.
Which paragraph?
Technically third paragraph, we're talking about maximizing efficiencies of processes. We also did talk about kind of, the performance management, role clarity, right? Job descriptions.
Okay.
The whole implications of digitization, right? Those were the only parts I noted.
So would you like us to make some changes and then we'll review it next?
Yeah, or I'm happy to.
We'll wait. We'll just do it next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
And then do it then. Okay. So we'll wait on the minutes. And we'll just do 2 next. All right. Natural environment. Here we go.
Just a question,
Yes.
because we have the sheet of community concerns and responses, and there was a large, long comment on governance there that Michael Shatkin, I did not discuss the ones last time. Should we take a moment to discuss this now, or are we really done with governance for now? And
Yeah, I'm going to give all of these comments directly to the consultants,
Okay.
and then they can incorporate them into the chapter as needed. Because we did kind of discuss that. We discussed a lot of the things he mentions here.
Points were covered.
Yeah. So that's okay. Give that to the consultants and they can. All right, so tonight's topic is the natural resources chapter. And I know that a lot of people have said, water is such a big part of everything. Maybe we should break that out and have a separate chapter, and then maybe have another chapter for our parks and our preservation lands and things like that. And BJ and I were talking to Noah, and he had a similar thought, was to kind of break out some of the more, I don't want to say recreational, but more conservation-y kind of topics into possibly a something else. So we'll wait for him to get on, and then we'll see what his ideas were. Unless, Emily, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I could just chime in. Sometimes we do put open space and recreation with more of like a community facilities chapter, just because those are assets that are used by the community, and the recommendations can tend to be kind of consistent. And we might also put natural environment and those kind of resources in with sustainability and resilience as we talk about those topics. So there's different ways of organizing it. I think Noah and Susan have taken the lead on how they're thinking about doing that for the edits.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So our goal tonight really is going to be to go through the action items, make sure we're not missing any content that we think is necessary, and then really go through the goals, objectives, and action items to make sure that they're what we want to be putting forward. Billy?
Well, as I made extensive comments, as you can see on what was printed out, I think before we get to action items, we have to look at the basic assumptions. And I think, Petra, you've mentioned this many, many, many times, assumptions, facts. The chapter starts with a bunch of unexamined assumptions. And that, I think we have to start there. And the action items follow from the assumptions. The assumptions are, I feel, a bit politicized, do not take all views into account. And I think we need to look at the assumptions before we can look at the action items.
Can I suggest that become more specific?
Pardon?
Let's do that on a specific.
Specific with those assumptions.
Yeah,
when we get there.
For example, it assumes that
Where is the part, though, that,
Pardon?
I'm just seeing it start with geology.
Geology is not an opinion.
Do you know like what page, which paragraph?
I'm
we
talking
can all-
about water, the water.
Isn't geology since
section.
I was gonna say, because maybe we'll start from the beginning of the chapter and work our way through. If people have the chapter up, I think that's probably gonna be a better, and then when we get to the area that
Okay,
you're
great. And
talking
most of
about-
the action items are, by the way, about water.
Yes.
So that the rest of the chapter really floats, is very descriptive, and really the focus of planning and is water.
I think there's some potential for other action items that are non-water related.
Yes, I think that's good.
I agree.
That's good.
Okay, so the beginning of the chapter is the basic geology and geography of the island, explaining its island, what we're consisting of. Wendy, you have a note. There's a line in here that says we have 64 distinct sub-watersheds on the island, and then you have a note, should we define this more for the reader?
Meaning like what is?
Well, what is a watershed?
Yeah, right.
Watershed, yeah.
It's just, by me, I'm not sure I know precisely what that means, and if the public is reading this, it all it takes is a one sentence definition.
Okay.
Or maybe a good opportunity for a graphic to show.
We do have a map
Yeah,
that shows all the
I know I've
different
seen
watersheds. Essentially, the
I didn't think it was
watershed
that many
is,
though. I thought it was like 17.
no, because they break down, I'll find a graphic for you. I think it's actually in the ground and surface water management
Well,
plan.
and is that from the 2014 plan that this information is coming from? So
That's what
there's
it
no-
says, yeah.
Yeah, so there's no more recent data? That's
The
almost.
watersheds aren't gonna change. The watersheds don't.
Geology is the geology.
Yeah.
Just a question, because 2014 was 9 years ago, so.
Right.
Right.
But also, this
Good
is
to
a
know.
good moment for the consultants to help
Yeah.
us since they've done Riverhead, Southampton, Southall. They must have talked about the watersheds in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that was just one of my points, was do they have any more recent information? And maybe that is the most recent information, but I think we should know that.
I'm just typing notes as we go like I did last
But
time.
I agree with Wendy, not everybody knows what a watershed is.
Right. And I do think that when the consultants go through this, they're gonna end up taking a lot out, condensing stuff, making it more user-friendly for the general public. Like we've said before, we just put everything in so they knew what the whole picture was when they looked at it. We kind of put everything in instead of accidentally leaving things out, so to speak. Okay, so then the next section is Shelter Island and the Peconic Bay environment. This topic we felt was important because the Peconic estuary is a very important estuary for Long Island in New York State. And so we thought we should include the fact that we're smack dab in the middle of it. And so the Peconic Estuary Program and some of the other programs kind of work, the CCE, for example, Cornell Cooperative Extension, kind of support a lot of the environmental initiatives around Shelter Island and the North and South Forks. And so the town does partner with them on a lot of different things. So that's why that's in there.
The point of history at this point is to point out the reason why the Peconic Estuary Program was founded. We had the brown tide that came in 1983, 84, and lasted for 4 or 5 years, where we had no clear water, the water was brown everywhere, and everything died. And in a scramble to try and repair that damage.
It does say that. It says a series of harmful algae blooms in the 1980s and 90s were part of the reason for creating.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's in there, yeah.
There was a lot in here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
We've also talked about something, I think, AJ, you were going to add something on bays and island waters, and this has become an issue recently with potential commercial expansion. So this is missing.
It is.
Maybe, I don't see it in another section, but maybe it could be.
I just finished with WMAC on that. It's always a day late, a dollar short.
Just mentioned that we could use something on that.
So I'm going to give that to the, hopefully by the end of this week, to the consultants. It's an outline, really, highlighting the topics that the WMAC talks about, or should be talking about too. I mean, there's that part of it as well. And so they'll figure out, I'm counting on the consultants to figure out how to fold it in. Because if we go to a separate chapter, depending on the editing they want to do.
As long as we don't forget it.
Right, no.
Does that include, I assume they're talking about the oyster harvesting leases that have been going on. That's part of what the WMAC is.
No, I don't.
WQI.
What is WMAC?
Not talking acronyms, we should.
Yes, you're right. The Water Management Advisory, and so they're more like the saltwater primarily, right? And WAC is primarily, Water Advisory Committee is primarily freshwater. It's not hard and fast, it's just kind of how it has devolved. And so when you talk about oyster leases, harvesting leases, I think that's all on the outside. And mostly Suffolk County controlled bottom and some private controlled bottom. So I don't know that that's for us. But what is discussed is habitat restoration in general on a sign. I look at the sign. So what would you like to see though? Just to have a quick.
I mean, it actually does affect people's lives on Shelter Island. I mean, what they're doing. And it should be discussed.
In the outer waters, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, from recreation, from boating, from sailing, from going to do things that people like to do in Shelter Island.
And do you see that within 1,500 feet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Where is that affecting? Yeah.
Definitely, especially down sort of by Upper Beach, at the end of Upper Beach, and down around towards going towards Mashomick on Ram Island side.
Yeah.
French Bay side.
Yeah.
I think this question too is, do we see in the future the town getting into this as well and doing town leases for similar initiatives?
Right.
You know, it doesn't exist now, obviously, but is that something that should exist? I know it's something we're kind of flirting with now with Cornell and some of their recent efforts.
Right.
You know,
In terms of habitat restoration as opposed to harvesting, right? So a little bit,
yeah, like leasing bottom land and
Right.
stuff like that.
right. But it's also part of the maritime heritage. Is that the context in which you would like it discussed?
It's really hard to know where to put it because it touches all these things. Especially one of the big issues is, do they require floating gear or submerged gear? And floating gear obviously causes a much bigger problem for people using the water in general, even within 1,500 feet of shore. But the ground tackle is harder to deal with. It's more expensive. It's something that the town's gonna have to, at some point, get involved in going forward. It may not be a huge issue right now. It's being fought privately or discussed privately. Something.
Oh, I got you.
Let's see, the next topic that comes up. So then it goes into our ecological resources, our different beaches, our meadows, our meadowgrass and eelgrass estuaries. You've got the old oak forest, and it just kind of explains all of those and where you can find them on the island. There's a map that shows all the resources, things that make us unique. And then we get into the island's ecology changes over time. So then that comes more into kind of how the wildlife has changed here. So, you know, the deer problem, the fluctuation of the fox populations, turkeys, the exploding turkey population. There's a comment here from Sean about maybe mentioning the devastating effects of DDT and the recovery of the osprey, and how well they've done. And sort of just to remind people that pesticides are still a threat, even though, you know, DDT we banned, but there are other pesticides that could have that kind of negative effect.
The turkeys. Everybody has a different theory on the turkeys. Maybe we should explain it in
I was
here.
gonna, that's the next comment, it's turkeys.
Yeah, but I mean, were they brought here to eat ticks? Why are they here?
Somebody released them.
I think they got
I mean, they're
free.
native, but someone released them. Or several people released them.
Oh, what, was it done purposefully or by accident or like?
Anecdotally,
Combo.
yes. Same thing as, you know, the groundhogs and a lot of other species that have never been found in Chiltern Island.
The groundhogs are destroying.
Yeah, the groundhogs. The groundhogs are a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
because
they're an issue because the foxes aren't here.
They're very tasty.
we're gonna start a campaign to eat groundhog. The foxes are back. No, okay.
I can't find them at the dump in the.
Yeah, so, you know, these are some of those issues that we're having now. We have overpopulation of deer with the turkeys and the groundhogs, and then ticks, of course, explode because, you know, groundhogs help spread ticks and they're one of the early feeders for ticks, and then ticks jump onto deer when they get bigger. So there's a whole life cycle of a tick, and these little animals promote that, which causes part of the problem. So here, we mentioned, there's a note about the growing rat problem and gopher problem, or groundhog problem. So I'm gonna leave that in because that might be something we want to address. Are there any other comments we should add around
Just to be
those?
particular, you shouldn't give dates for shotgun season, just should be the month of January. Yeah, it's just a weekly thing, so.
That's under control, deer control.
You talk about rare species identified on Shelter Islands, looks like a lot of plants and a beetle. I know there's a lot more than that. I mean, just a general comment I was gonna say to the end, the entire environmental side of this is severely lacking, especially if you look at the 94 plan, which the chapter itself was fairly succinct. But if you go through and look through all the action points, I mean, it was very thorough.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was kind of lost in translation of this chapter, I think. I think a lot of it's still relevant. So I think we should go back to 94 plan, pull as much out as we can,
Yeah,
add in, and I mean,
absolutely do that.
Especially if we split it into two chapters.
I find, there's a lot.
There is a lot, there's a lot missing. Well, and I
Missing
think
on
if
the
we can
environment
show, you know, how things have evolved either for the positive or for the detrimental, right? Because that, over a 30-year period, you can see, again, certain animal populations versus vegetation and what may have been introduced since then.
Talk about the invasive species in the current state of our environment, which in a lot of areas is not healthy whatsoever.
It's true, right? Yeah.
You know, I think, you know, I don't know if you want to touch on controlled burns and stuff like that and why it's more difficult to accomplish now. It's not impossible. But I think if we get a more fleshed out rough draft and then,
Yes.
you know, put it out to some of the other stakeholders to help refine, because we have a lot on the island.
Even tonight, before we get through all the, or when we start the action items and goals and objectives, I'll pull up the 94 and we can go through that, because I put it all in a chart already, so it's already broken out.
Maybe worth mentioning the economic effect on individual property owners with the invasive species. I mean, the groundhogs are eating all sorts of stuff in my house. And
What are they like? No, I'm just curious.
pretty much a lot of stuff.
Really?
Oh, they eat everything. And they're huge in there, but they also manage to like burrow under the fences and through the little openings. I mean, they're horrible. They're living under our porch. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm about to spend a stupid amount of money to eradicate some invasive species on the front of my property. And it's worth the catch.
Yeah.
That's how chipmunks used to be.
I know, that's true. Groundhogs are almost worse than the deer because there's nothing you can do about them.
It's too small to hit from a distance. Well, never mind.
Very crafty too, yeah, they're really hard to catch.
Sean will be at my house.
Exactly.
They're not easy.
Okay.
We need more cougars.
I think Dan's papers had an article about that one.
Were there ever any cats on this
Dan's
island?
All right, so then the next section we get into is drinking water. So most of this section was based off of the 2020 Ground and Surface Water Management Plan that was prepared by the Water Advisory Committee. So they did a lot of work leading up to this.
May I ask, was there a hydrologist or any sort of expert that ever made an overall water survey of our? It was the water committee.
I think it was in combination with Nelson Pope and Voorhees. I mean, I
A
have
lot of
a,
information is county-based also.
Pardon?
A lot of information is county-based, which uses their hydrologists and their, so it's not made-up information.
Well, one of the things I had
and
a
it's all
problem.
cited. You can.
If the section itself is contradictory in that it points out there are points at which the 2020 says the aquifer is fine for all our uses. Other documents say it isn't. Then we hear quality is the problem, but now quantity, on the other hand, points out that quantity is a problem in some parts of the island, like Rams Island and Montclair. So I think, and then it goes on at the end to make the assumption that the aquifer, our water aquifer is fine, and then we can go on and make plans from there, because there is no discussion of any constraint to building land use or development in terms of the aquifer, the fragile aquifer, whereas the whole 1994 document focused on the aquifer. So I think I have, that's enough for.
I think just to clarify what you're saying, this whole section really goes into explaining the issues that we have with the aquifer. It doesn't say everything is hunky-dory. It says that we have a large quantity of water on the island, and we do. It's just not evenly dispersed to all parts of the island, which it does state in here. And then it says quality of water fluctuates from place to place, because in the center of town you have poor quality of water, but towards the near shore there are areas that actually have nice water, but then you get even closer to the edge and you have saltwater intrusion. So it does explain the way that water changes between different parts of the island. It doesn't assume that everything's fine. It's actually far more in-depth discussion of the complications that we have and that we're dealing with.
Well,
Maybe it's a draft.
to answer that, it mentions recreation, I believe, at the very end in the action items as a constraint on resources like water, but it doesn't ever mention development and land use as a potential factor to balance in when we think about our aquifer. So that's where I find a fault is compared to the 1994 plan, which says that we really have to weigh and balance these factors.
Well, that affects everything in this chapter, because development impinges upon native species, upon pushing deer into other, I mean, it's cascades into everything to do with the environment.
Right. And then there will be the whole chapter on land use and zoning that will have to take the aquifer into account. when it comes to zoning and land use. So I think, I understand.
Environment as well.
Yeah, and it, you know, it has to take everything into account. So I understand where you're coming from, but when you actually read it, it's more a description of what we have happening in all the different parts of the island.
I would agree with Lily. It was a little bit confusing in parts. There's a lot of data here, which is great, but there are some sentences that say we do have a quality and a quantity problem. So I just think we're just observing
Too,
that
and
there
that-
probably
but it-
just needs to be a bit of a summation to say, and again, if the consultants can help us with this, kind of what's happened from 1994 going forward, both from a quality perspective, a quantity perspective, where is the issue most acute? We have an, uneven distribution system. We need to find ways to,
Right.
even that. And then, what are then the external factors, impacting water that we have control over, right?
So it's very much
Development.
location
Yeah.
dependent upon what
But I think
issue and
if
problem
we could
is.
somehow find a way, and I think I'm a huge fan of data, as you guys know, but I think it's also kind of what is this actually telling us at the end of the day here? What are the most critical issues,
Areas.
right? And then what are
Yeah.
the action or the levers that impact water, which is a lot,
I think this is.
and the priorities.
Yeah, I agree with you. I came away from this chapter confused, but I came away saying this is a drafting problem. I mean, most of the stuff is here, it's just not presented properly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And this is where the consultants can earn some money.
absolutely.
right, because I think we
What you
do
say,
have
the
a
data's
quantity
there.
and a quality problem,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, I think we can agree, like, everything is not good with water.
Right.
Complicated.
Yeah, it is, but it's sort of how do we start to uncomplicate it? But kind of the narrative.
Triage it. I think
Yeah.
that's the word we should use, actually, that it's a triage situation. There's some terrible water here in the center it's affecting people's
Right.
health, that's
Yeah,
first. And then, the edges of,
Right.
that are salted, and people may not even be aware that their levels are too high with salt. So maybe that's the clarity that
Yeah.
would, if we had to add a paragraph
right, and
to.
what are the actions and the, because at
Right.
the end of the day, it is prioritization.
Yeah,
To where it's most needed, and then what are the possible remedies?
yeah.
That's gonna be in the action plan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where you really stipulate exactly the list of priorities and what has to be addressed first.
So, I mean, this really does have all the information, and it also explains all the different plans and studies that have been done and all the information that's added to them. So, I mean, there's a ton in here, and I'm sure it's gonna get boiled down to like the very basics. Hey, Noah.
Hello. Sorry, I'm
know.
late. I've been listening in for 15 minutes. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah.
For the readers of this chapter, it might be nice if at some place there's like a bullet list of main points.
Yes.
And then they can dive down into these kind of really technical areas, but at least they come around recognizing the problems that
Well,
Lily was having.
I think that's important, what you just said, Wendy.
Absolutely, but
EFJ wants to highlight at the beginning of every chapter, this is what's in this chapter. These are the key issues, problems.
takeaways.
Yeah, key takeaways, and that's should guide your reading of the chapter. So to Ben's point, this is a draft and it's somewhat rough, but I think that if you kind of came away confused, there's for good reason, but Noah is going to solve that for us.
No, it's good. It's always good to have another reader. I mean, we've already started editing, and I think even just moving some of the content around, it's surprising how big of a difference it makes. A lot of the information in the chapters are there. Some of it needs to be tweaked. We might need more or less, but just a reorganization will make a huge difference. We've already started, and anyways, that is our plan, to kind of bring an executive summary up to the front to kind of give you a sense of what it is that you're going to learn in that chapter. And so you don't have to really dive into the weeds in order to kind of get out the kind of, the important bits of what you need to know.
And Noah, when we first started, people expressed a desire to have the water specifically broken out into a separate chapter and maybe parks and conservation land and things like that in another chapter. And I had mentioned that you had discussed, you had some ideas on how we could fix this and make it work in the overall plan without kind of, people feel like the natural environment part, like the actual ecology is kind of being minimized at the moment because there's so much water in here. And I said, you guys would probably have a plan for that.
Yeah, I mean, we can change it. Our plan was to group natural resources with infrastructure. And I know infrastructure, what usually you think about, pipes and hard infrastructure, but a lot of the infrastructure in town has to do with water quality and sewers and things having to do with natural resources. When we talk about roads, that will be addressed in the transportation section. So, and other community facilities will be addressed there. So, infrastructure and natural resources tend to, there's a lot of crossover between those chapters. Maybe we call it, I don't know, maybe we reword it, but that was kind of what we were thinking. But we can certainly change things around. I think that would really be addressing water quality, and then parks and recreation might be a separate chapter. So, thinking about like the natural resources from a health and environmental quality standpoint in the first one, and then Parks and Rec, thinking about more like programming and community facilities for what people do for recreation or both active and passive.
Okay. And just scrolling down a little bit, Petra, you had a comment about inventorying the various septic cesspools and stuff on the island in order to.
We've done a lot of that already.
Yeah.
Does that exist already?
It's on the GIS system.
That would be very important, rather than just, point out one system.
Well, and I mean, essentially, if you don't have an IA system, everyone's polluting at the same level. So whether your system's made out of brick or block or precast, you're putting out the same amount of pollution. So it doesn't really make a difference on what your system's built of, because it's still the same level of pollution.
Does that matter how full it is though, and how frequently it's pumped?
I mean, pumping it is great because then you don't have so many solids that go into your leaching pool and then eventually silt it and clog it and then it no longer drains. That's really why you pump it. But it doesn't change the nitrate level going into the ground at all. Pumping it's more for maintenance.
An inventory might do something else as well. It might point out that there are IA systems that I have a problem, you see, with the assumption that fragmentation is the problem and therefore, or decentralization, and therefore centralization is the answer in all the action items. And if we had an inventory of the different possible means available and what's the usage, it might be a different, we would see a different possible agenda, different ways to go forward from the document.
Yeah, IA systems are tracked on the town's GIS. So they are. So every time a new one's put in, you have to fill out a septic registry, and then that septic registry gets logged into GIS.
Okay.
It's just a separate layer on the GIS. So yes, those are all being tracked. And that's great because then you can see how many IAs have gone into an area and then what the net reduction is in that area.
Would be interesting too, like again, this data evolution over time, like this is approximately where we were at the 94 plan. This is where we are today. This is what's improved positively. We have a number that are under crumbling infrastructure that need to be replaced, right? And then what is the plan for that, right? If that's indeed the conclusion. And again, where are those, right? So to BJ's point, you can triage and prioritize.
I think we logged everything that we had in a permit for in the building department.
Okay.
We collected all of those. The interns went through, located them on the properties, on the GIS. and the wells,
Okay.
Interesting.
The WQI uses those, also, right?
but we don't have everybody because we don't have permits for pre-existing stuff
Right,
that was out there before those permits, so they're uncollected.
Yeah, but you have to assume if there's a house, there's a sanitary system of some fashion. And if it's not an IA system, then it's
Conventional.
conventional,
right, but
some form of
majority
conventional.
on island systems will not be IA, right? I mean,
Right.
what, I don't even know, like, what percentage
no idea.
at this point.
It could be 5%, I don't.
200, I would say,
Yeah.
on the island right now.
Okay, so that's like.
A lot.
like
200
less
out
than
of what?
10%.
Less than 10%. That's
So in the WQI,
Yeah.
in their
10%.
first time ever plan, that is going to be part of the
WQI.
I'm sorry, water quality improvement, which it gets its funds from community preservation funds when you transfer the property. No, so some of that money goes to water quality improvement, and this, the goal is 50 new systems a year for the next few years. I mean, hopefully that can expand even faster. Right.
Right there.
So that's kind of happening. I don't know how much goes into the comprehensive plan that's already kind of built into governance.
Happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've wrestled with this all along.
Okay.
This idea of what goes in here, it's there already, we're doing it, kind of thing. I don't know.
That's it.
Well, and
The
it's
push of the
important,
transfer
that
tax
might be.
is like 20%,
Say again?
but 20% goes to WQ.
Aye.
20% of the
And 80% goes to CPI.
Right.
Right. And
And 0.5% to housing.
Right. And in addition to what the town is doing, Suffolk County has its own programs that are in place that mandate upgrades for certain types of construction and all types of things. They also have the grant programs. So there's a New York State grant for IA systems and the Suffolk County grant for IA systems. So there's 3 grants available for anybody who wants to upgrade their septic system. And there's priority given to people who have an old brick or cement block septic system. So there's already plans in place, and Suffolk County has a 30-year plan to upgrade all septic systems on Long Island. And so we're included in that 30-year goal. So, the planning and implementation for this goes beyond just Shelter Island. I mean, this is countywide, and it's backed by the state. So
What is the miss here this is our town, our island. Should we be packaging and marketing and making it easier for people to find this money? Like if I went home tonight and said, I want an IA system, I wouldn't know where to look. I call you.
I would tell you what to do. But that's what the Water Quality Improvement Advisory
Yeah.
Board is working on. They're actually working on a way to streamline the whole process so that a homeowner can come to them and say, hey, I want to upgrade my septic system. And then they can help the homeowner through the grant processes and figure out how it works.
And outreach.
Process of like changing the
Of changing.
forms, even the forms that people do, and like a top sheet and a guideline,
Awesome.
like a concierge kind of system.
But for this document, should that be a goal in this document?
That's all.
That would be very useful.
Yeah,
Put that
it does show.
Well, it's part of that new
Progress.
plan that we have.
All right, it is. It's already part of the documentation of the town.
Yeah.
Well,
How we.
I don't think
it's
people are going.
it's more of a marketing thing. I mean,
But I
go,
don't
go, Julia, do that. That's awesome. But shouldn't it be a goal to support what you're doing and market it to
So
everyone?
maybe have a goal with like a number, like
Yeah.
by the year X, to a 10-year plan, we would like 80 or 90% or whatever
Exactly.
converted, so that there's,
Yeah.
Well, I would say if it is
Buy
gonna go in
these
here, it would
programs.
have to reflect what's already been worked on by the towns. The
Right.
town board is doing a plan,
I
right?
mean, because our laws are already more strict than the county's laws when it comes to when you're required to upgrade. So, the town has also already started to put things in place that force you to upgrade systems when the county may not require it, but the town does, because we're allowed to be more restrictive than the county. So, some of that has already been done. And Ben, to your question, the Reclaim Our Water website has all the information you need on IA systems. Tells you every kind allowed to be installed in Suffolk County, data, everything. So it's Reclaim Our Water.
Go to the town website, scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's a link for it.
So I shouldn't call you.
You can, I mean.
If I could jump in, it seems like it might be a good idea to meet with the Water Quality Advisory Board just to understand how we can empower them, what's working, what's not working. If there's anything that that can be done, where they seem to be getting traction. what, how the town can help moving forward. We might want to put that in there.
Okay, that sounds good. Make a note.
Water.info.
Yes. So then, from there, so we're already tracking the IA systems that are being installed. And for private homeowners, if your system was installed after 1980, then you should have a certificate from the county telling you what you have installed. So there's no need to necessarily dig up everyone's system to see what they have, because most people should have papers, or the county will have papers if you bought your house after somebody else had installed it, kind of telling you what's there and where it's located on the property. But there's no like complete digital record of that on a GIS somewhere that we have access to. I don't even think the county has that. It's just, as we gain information, we post it.
When people sell their homes, are they required to have some documentation regarding that? Is that required at all?
Depends on the sale and who asks for what. I mean, I've had people come to me and maybe not even know they had a septic tank. They thought they were on a sewer and they couldn't figure out what was going on. So that really varies, I'm gonna say.
Well, I'd use your question more towards.
Should there be a requirement?
Regulation.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That's more likely.
It'd be nice to at least alert people, because people coming from the city probably assume that they have town water and they don't. That's all they don't
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no one tells them.
No, and I think if you did mandate it as a part of the sale.
I mean, that's a, not controversial.
An inspection, and quite frankly, you should require it.
The county's looking to implement that you have to upgrade on property transfer. But they're waiting until they're staffed appropriately to handle the influx of applications that they're gonna get. That's part of the problem, is that the county doesn't have the bandwidth to handle that number of applications. Like, they know what they can handle, and they're trying to staff up in order to take that on before they make that legislative change.
So we could mandate it, but it would be tough. I mean,
Yeah.
Hard to enforce.
Well, because if you want, like most closings are a 3-month contract, right?
Yeah.
So that's my first question. Is it a promise? I'll do this, or do you do it before you list your house? Or I just have questions about actual practicality.
Yeah, it's definitely something to look into, because it's definitely something that is going to be happening, whether we do it or not. It's gonna come down from code if we don't encourage that.
Encourage it.
Yeah.
Oh, it should be in the private sector can.
Encourage the town to research the implementation of this.
That becomes an action item.
Yeah.
Right, that's what I'm,
Absolutely.
Practically, if there's enough awareness and it becomes part of a real estate
Well, I
transaction,
was just gonna say, I mean,
you can escrow for it at closing if it can't happen before then.
Right.
I mean, it becomes a bit of a mess.
a bit,
But
a little bit.
And then the next section kind of goes into the ground and surface water management plan. And let's see.
Page, we got 17.
Yeah, I just scrolled past the pictures. I'm on page 13. Or 14. Yes. And so, a lot of the action items that are in here came from the ground and surface water management plan, so that they're here for discussion. And then we should take the 94 plan and look at that and see what recommendations we want to take from the 94 plan and what's still.
If we look at goal number 4, that land use patterns should be consistent with the protection. So we should, like this, since it is in Suffolk County.
Right.
Right.
Well, just sort of outcomes.
Yeah, so let's go all the way down. Well, actually, do we want to comment on, and from there it goes into climate change and sea level rise?
Before we do that, does the town have a scheduled plan for like testing the water? To track this over time? I know we can't control water tests on private property.
Right.
However, town owns a lot of land, a lot of data points. Over time, I think it would be valuable
Right.
to set up some sort of monitoring going back to trying to at least collect data for the future, you know.
And we
Public
have,
land?
Yes, yeah, that's the only thing,
Right.
that's only locations where the town could test the water.
Right.
And then maybe volunteer to have private homeowners submit theirs
Yeah.
as well.
twofold. So the USGS is doing that. So we are doing that with the USGS and have been for quite a few years now in all the test wells that we have.
How extensive is that? Is that
They're
like,
kind of scattered. It's
is that something that we
wells,
can?
13 wells, but
Yeah, I
it's
think
something
there's
that we
13.
have.
Yeah.
Pun intended.
And in certain sensitive areas, you could ask private, property owners to help.
And
And
that-
you put a test well.
that's
Or
the
you
next
could
thing that
ask,
we're working
you know,
on.
I know in the Heights, they're very careful. Perhaps the homeowner associations can get involved in this. This
Right.
would be
Make it
a
easier
very
for
good
them.
project for homeowner associations to check where the water is.
Yeah, I just see that it's too invaluable to not set up some sort of system.
What I'm working
plan to
on now
monitor this.
is a way to get baseline data.
Yeah.
So I'm actually looking at sending out a mass mailing to everybody in the center of town specifically because there is no homeowners association for the center of town. There's no real, and just to let people know what's going on, what we're hoping to do, and see if we can go into a partnership with the homeowner to get their water tested and to share the data.
All town buildings are tested annually.
Yes, the town buildings are all tested, so we have that information, but we really want to know what's happening past us. And so I'm trying to get something set up where we can get all like homeowners to buy into it. And then, knowing that their personal data won't be released, it'll be like, this general area and like mark off a whole square has an average of this nitrate level. Just kind of doing it that way so that
So
we internally have data.
Squad now, they do routine testing.
Right.
They report back all of the compounds that they find, so that's one flagrant. I think the Heights does something very similar.
Yeah, the water districts have to because they're a public water supply, so they have to do that testing and make it available to the people who drink the water.
So it's a
But,
matter of pulling that together and filling in the gaps.
right,
And there's a lot of private information, though. I know the Banner tests the water all the time.
Mhm.
And I'm sure they'd be happy to give it to you.
There-
Don't quote me
yeah,
on that.
yeah. I'm going to quote you on
We
that.
test our water monthly also
Yeah.
at the preserve, but we also have those USGS wells are on the property. They come in and test.
But I bet a lot of private homeowners do not.
No, they don't. And we foiled the county for information, for water test information on the island, and the county will not give you individual homeowners' information, like won't give you water quality data for that parcel. So what they'll say is, here's all the data for Midway Road. And you get a list, and it's just nitrate readings for all of Midway Road, or all of 114, or all of West Neck. So you can't really track it. There's no way of knowing if it's going up or down based on location or, so, we're hoping to get more solid data for a specific area that we can use as a benchmark that we can measure against in the future. So that is currently in the works. Hasn't quite gotten to we're mailing it out next week yet, but we're working on it.
Do you think if the county, if there was some kind of waiver, would the county provide that information? If you ask property owners, sign this form, if it's, you allow us to kind of get that information, and then maybe the county would provide it, just.
Possibly, if the county even has it. So for a lot of these properties, they're pretty old and there's no saying whether or not they've had a water test done in the last 20 years. So that's another thing, is that some of these properties just don't have any data. They haven't really done much to them, so there's been no need or requirement.
And the other side is I test my water every 3 years.
Mhm.
And I look at it, it looks fine, I throw it in the garbage.
Right.
I'd be happy to give it to town hall.
Yeah, and that's something else that I was hoping to do, is kind of set up a program where we could get people to voluntarily share their data with this. With the well registry, people have to submit water tests with the well registry. But most of those well registries are going in on new homes, on vacant lots, so there aren't a ton of them, or people have a failed well or putting in a new well and then they have to do it. So that's usually coming up with the new construction, the major renovations, things like that, is where we're seeing that turnover, which is mostly near shore, which doesn't really help give us the information for the larger part of the area of the island.
Maybe able to partner with some of the private companies around here that do a lot of the water testing as
I've
well.
already,
And I'm being told that the county does test when you have a new baby in the house, which
really?
didn't happen for me, but that was a long time ago.
Different.
The busy.
Wait, they'll go into someone's home and want to test the water if you have a new baby?
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm being told, yeah.
I hadn't heard that. Imagine people.
Typically, you have to
I would.
request it. You have to, because then you have to request that water test.
You
And then
do.
they coordinate with you when you're home, because they have to, there's a whole chain of custody on how
Right.
water is sampled and tested. And so it's
Not that,
not usually a, hey, by the way, I'm testing your water. You have to like coordinate it and plan it. Yeah.
But I do think there is this, I'm gonna call it, for lack of a better term, kind of private-public partnership, right? Where it's sort of, you get people to coordinate and cooperate and in exchange for data, we're giving you access to resources, information. What can you be doing better differently? Kind of what is different living on an island where you don't have sewer and water? And I think that's, I think
Making
somehow.
informed choices about
Right,
their own.
exactly. Right, about their own utilities,
Right.
you know, the impact on the environment, their own health. I think there's a lot of factors there. I think that to me should be some kind of action, right?
Drop off your water test and get 5 free garbage bags.
I'll sign up.
Yeah.
Make it 10.
You can test. I'll go with my-
Well, I was also trying to see if there's some way that, but I'm looking into a whole bunch of different options for it. All right, so then we go into climate change and sea level rise. And we discuss how this impacts the island, seeing as how we are an island, and, you know, most of the ferries have already started having to raise their ramps and make adjustments for the high tides that we're having.
We're not gonna talk about the goals, are we okay with the goals?
those are lifted entirely from
Yeah.
the
So I
surface.
figured we kind of work on that more in the action items, because that's kind of a. I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything big in some of these sections. So sea level rise and the impacts of that are kind of listed here. One of the things I'm not sure that I cover well is the fact that with sea level rise, the impact on beaches and marshes is that they can't move inland because we've hardened the shore so much. So I'm not sure if that's really covered here.
It's mentioned several times in this chapter.
Okay, good.
I've seen it, I just can't.
Yeah.
That's right, it's like, you need to make sure it's mentioned.
Second chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, page 18.
You can say it again, it's important.
It's their
It is important.
impact on mud floods, whatever.
Yeah. Because those marshes act like a sponge and protect the coast during hurricanes and large storm events.
You have it here on India. Yep.
Right, so I
It
took,
says at the bottom of page 18, the second last paragraph, the particular impact on beaches, marshes, and mudflats as sea level rises is expected because of development of blah, 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 blah.
Adjacent upland areas.
And it's
right.
mentioned earlier in the chapter as well.
And it's also in the other, in the waterways outline that I'm still working on.
all right, and there are the maps that go with that. And then we can go down to findings,
Don't
challenging.
those maps scare anybody?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah,
terrifying.
the 36-inch one.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're on the number.
Oh, my gosh, yeah,
Concern.
yeah,
Get your boat out.
really,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I've
I
seen.
think the insurance companies are looking at these same maps.
yeah.
Well, I think it's a catch-22 too. You look at that map and obviously I'm a huge advocate for, you know, the health of the bays and the wetlands, absolutely. But there's the balance of it's protected and it needs to be protected. But also if you want to try to protect yourself from something like this and try to, there's restrictions in place that prevent you or significantly delay you into, you know, having your entire property flooded out.
Right.
So I know it's a difficult balance to try to balance that.
It is, and you know, is it that we just try to organize a nice retreat from the shore? Or, you know, do we try to hang on with bulkheads?
And I know a lot of this is dictated by the state as
Yeah.
well, if not
Yeah.
most of it.
Yeah.
You have to, the DEC process for doing something like bulkheading, which you're just not allowed to do unless you have a.
I'm not saying we should
pre-existing or-
bulkhead.
Yeah.
or-
Right.
But like just the process alone for getting permissions for those kind of things, rock revetments, you know, even
just-
increased
even just
buffers
fill
where you're
and
just filling and
vegetation.
vegetating. It's a process. It's like a 2-year DEC process to get approval for some of these things.
But how will that change? What pressures will be brought as more and more people, and especially high-value properties or previously high-valued properties are threatened as in the next decade? I mean, it's not that,
Well, the one you're gonna lose that's probably gonna be most prominent is Crescent Beach.
yeah,
So you got it choked off now on Camp Winnipeg side.
right,
And if you noticed, almost all of Serpentine's bulkheaded now.
yes,
So that was your sand supply coming down the hill.
right, yeah.
It was fascinating, colonial times, no one would build a house on the shore because they were
Right.
smart.
Yeah.
And now everybody wants a shorefront house, and then as soon as a hurricane comes, they run into the federal government to help them build a little mansion.
And that's part of it is, you know, a lot of properties haven't been built on because they're not ideal building lots, you know, they're not good options.
They got great views.
They might have a great view, but you're also gonna
The
have
land
a
in the
really
center of
wet
town was
floor.
valued because it had good water in it, you know, there's.
There's no risk of flooding.
It wasn't gonna flood.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I understand the waterfront's desirable, but, I mean, I was gonna go here, but I'm already here. I put my comment in, I'm sure most of you read, I mean, for the various reasons we've stated, you know, the coast is so fragile, whether it's the environmental impacts, the water impacts, whether it's nitrogen, pesticides, or even just like West Neck and Montclair, just the shallow aquifer, there is no water, saltwater intrusion.
That's right.
All these reasons, you know, anecdotally, a vast majority of our construction is happening in the nearshore overlay.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do we curb this? I mean, we're building all of our construction in the most sensitive areas. So how do we influence, you know, the kind of redistribution of the island to make, you know, to conserve what we have left, really?
Right. An orderly retreat.
Speaks broadly to development.
No, I know, and this is all,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a.
I think this chapter sets
topic.
the constraints and,
Right.
you know,
If you
what we
look
have
at
to
the
work with.
water
Clearer,
is-
I think what you've said is so important, and I think it should stress just what you've stressed. I don't think it comes out as clear in the chapter, that's the problem.
Yeah, and I don't know
have
if it
with
should in this particular chapter,
Chapter.
because
Yeah.
this identifies, to me, the constraints and where we're at,
Right.
and a lot of other things as well, but then it's the land use.
Yes,
chapter.
but it's
Land use.
well,
It's-
both
it's-
maybe,
yeah.
depending how we
Yeah.
organize it. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it affects everything,
It
but,
affects everything, right.
but it seems foolish to me to continue the path that we're going,
Yeah.
knowing with sea level rise and all these other negative effects.
I think the comp plan has to address, I mean, I don't think we're there yet, we're not in the right chapters, but it does have to address the scale of housing and where the scale should be allowed to.
That's appropriate for what
And, you know,
we're doing.
hence, a discussion of a moratorium, I mean, until the comp plan sort of gets to a place where we have had a lot of public input and we know where we're at. As opposed to keep letting it happen and then there's nothing left to save.
They paved Paradise and put in a parking
Parking
lot.
lot, right? So, Sean, you're going to bring that up again, I'm sure.
I'm sure it's
Thank you.
gonna come up.
It is a delicate balance between encouraging development and progress.
And property rights as well.
Shooting yourself
Yeah.
in the foot by doing so and end up destroying the exact environment you moved here for.
Yeah, right,
And also
exactly.
not denying property rights. I mean, if you have a technically legally buildable lot and you purchased it as a buildable lot, then to then make it unbuildable through legislation causes a whole nother level of problems.
It's a taking.
It is a taking. So that's something that has to.
But I think it's something that's got to be thought of for the greater good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know it's not going to be popular, but
It has to be thought of and we have to sort it all out because there's nuances to how it has to happen.
We have to
be defensible.
highlight it.
Okay. So findings, let's go right into the findings and see if we need to add
The first finding, I think, has to be qualified to point out that it's not just the quality, but the quantity as well. It has to be rewritten.
I'm sorry, which?
Okay.
Application, yes, that's all I'm saying.
Say what page you're on?
Yeah, so let's suggest something, because there's many people in the room and not knowing. Why don't we just like
Findings,
read the
it's the-
findings, so everybody knows what.
Okay, good idea.
Top of page 22.
So I'll read it. Findings, Shelter Island's aquifer can supply the quantity of water needed, but the quality of that water varies, and depending on location, is threatened by nitrate contamination from septic systems, saltwater intrusion, and other pollutants. So I think what you're saying is that the quantity has to be addressed in areas where it is not.
Right.
I know what you're saying.
Right, that's all. Just to qualify it, so that it's correct.
That needs to be edited.
Right, right. Well, it's important. Okay.
And depending on location, so does the quantity.
Under the findings, we might also put in, maybe that's a good point, to put in the point about the combined threat of climate change on the coastal areas, something like that.
Looking at the projections, yeah, taking those into account.
Putting it into the findings,
So
right?
that resilience will mean,
Yes, or something
Right.
right here.
resilience will demand. How do you want me to finish that, Lily?
Attention to climate change patterns,
Right, right.
its effect on shore areas.
Right, something like that, I
The
think.
change and its impact. Again, this is being polished, we just want to get the thoughts in here.
Sean added a comment that I really agree with here, a couple others did too, that the findings, I think that needs to be expanded considerably based on including more
Yes.
about the environment.
Yes.
Right. And we also should, well, let's see.
The next finding is that the island retains ecological resources of statewide importance in Mashamak Preserve and other areas. So that's just.
Maybe retains and grows. It'd be nice to expand the natural.
This is a finding.
This is a
though.
finding.
Oh, it's a finding,
Right.
never mind.
Just, and then the next one is low-lying areas of the island are subject to flooding, but over the near-term impacts will remain focused on waterfront facilities, roads, and natural areas along the coast. So it's all going to be mostly coastal flooding.
So I'll put that resilience in there.
Okay.
Okay.
The next,
Why just Mashamak? Do you want to try to list a few others, or is it? It's not like why say one and not the others, or should we just not say any?
well, it's in Mashamak Preserve and other areas, because Mashamak really does have the majority of, yeah. And it's mostly, undeveloped, and so it really does have
Because
the
of the
majority of
biodiversity. and-
biodiversity
and,
that the rest of the island doesn't
Natural
necessarily have anymore.
heritage listings of plants and things like that.
Those next two I just put down more as thoughts, not necessarily as findings, but
Yes.
Yeah, so then the next one is that the proliferation of ticks and various tick-borne illnesses pose significant health risks to all residing on and visiting the island. I think that's an important one. And then,
The presence of a population of deer also presents hazards. That's true. Excellent.
yeah.
It's not just the decentralized nature at all, because most small places do not have central wastewater. Are we looking at challenges?
No, not yet.
Oh, sorry. Low-lying areas, well,
Widespread spraying for mosquitoes is still an issue and a threat. Suffolk County comes out and sprays close to 100 locations on the island multiple times a month. So maybe this might be pesticide use.
Tells me that we don't have any control over that, just worries me.
There's a whole, so Thursday, there was a speaker who came in and talked to the Green Options Committee about pesticide usage on the island and just in general, Suffolk County and New York State in general. And there's a whole category of pesticides that aren't classified or studied or because they're natural. So they're considered safe, like cedar oil and things like that. So very interesting. It should be on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's a very interesting presentation. But for this, we may not want to be just mosquito specific, but just say widespread pesticide spraying maybe threatens local
Because
ecology.
people are spraying their lawns for ticks. I have no idea what they're putting on their lawn. I've not done it.
So I mentioned to a couple people before we started, the East Hampton Star, I think last week had a good editorial, dire figures on chemical use.
Suffolk County leads.
Suffolk County is the -- 1 in the entire state on pesticide use,
Yeah.
which is, and they do a
This
pretty,
distinction.
and they do a pretty good job. I think it's a short editorial, but, you know, they list a couple of the main ones, you know, crabgrass control, broadleaf weed killer, a lot of stuff that is being put down at this time of year and is having devastating effects on shellfish, you know, small birds, reptiles. Permethrin is, you know, banned in other countries,
Right,
promoted here, you know.
right.
Safe
So
alternative.
I think it's a huge topic that needs to be addressed. I think the enforcement of it is extremely difficult.
Well, there's the dilemma between pesticides to get rid of unwanted greenery versus pesticides to get rid of pests that carry disease.
And they can be useful.
Which it could be useful, it could also still be dangerous. So you know, we're trying to balance spraying for ticks and having little kids come up with all these, you know, Rocky Mountain spotted feet or whatever, or Lyme disease. Right.
So I added the use of pesticides and spraying to this. All right, so we'll move into challenges. The first challenge is that the decentralized nature of both the island's water supply and wastewater treatment make comprehensive solutions challenging. Protecting the town's water supply will require continual diligent action at all levels.
I have problems with the way the assumptions there. I mean, there's no reason you couldn't have individuals. So the problem, and very few small places have wastewater plants or community public water systems. So I have a problem with how it's written.
So it's,
Versus comprehensive, assuming there should be a comprehensive solution.
it doesn't assume, so.
Well, it's
what
written.
Well, what it's saying is that because we don't have a centralized system, then we have to address it property by property, which is a challenge. It just
Just
is a
is,
challenge.
it's just easier to do it.
Because you have
Not to say you want
I
that.
understand what you're saying.
Nature, so then we should say the nature of the island's water supply and wastewater treatment are challenging as currently exists, since they are for the most part with 10% of the island with systems in current use. This is because this is getting into, there is a big
So
political
what you-
controversy, Noah, which you may not
So
know about
he
an
knows.
IA system or why, you know, individual
So Lily,
systems
here's
or
a
a plan.
solution.
And I don't think the plan should point one way or another.
So
This is-
what I'm gonna recommend is that we take out the word comprehensive because,
And decentralized.
yeah,
Why? They are decentralized.
Right, it is
They are
decentralized.
decentralized.
That's a
fact.
They're facts, but they're facts that point to, in a direction.
No, I don't think they do. I don't read it that way.
Oh,
I don't.
put those two together, if you.
I am.
It is.
It's a descriptive fact that we
Yeah.
don't have a central, so we all have our own septic
Right.
systems of varying types. And you can't tell me what I have to do or not
Yeah.
do. That could be a problem if my cesspool is leaching into your I mean,
right.
it's tough. On the other hand, if everyone's on the same water system, you treat it all, everyone gets the same thing. It's simply, I think it's describing that it is a challenge when you've got 1,500 people.
Especially when it says,
Take out comprehensive.
yeah, that's.
How
fine.
comprehensive. It should be written in a more neutral way.
Like, because of its decentralized nature, we gotta be on this.
Right.
That's it, you know?
Centralized it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Comprehensive was a bigger problem.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
done.
Just solutions, yeah, truth.
Right. All right, so then the next one is the recreational demand on natural areas needs to be balanced with the protection of sensitive resources.
I would add recreational and developmental, because you've got to put in land use. Why just focus on recreation?
No, I agree with that. I like that. And development.
Yeah,
Okay.
developmental demand.
Yep. And then the next one is climate change will see rising temperatures and more frequent droughts and an increase in the number and severity of storms. So this is,
Increase in the number, I think you probably want to say.
yes.
It's already here. We've already got it.
It's here.
Yeah, it is. All right, the next,
Some believe it's not, but it is.
It causes flooding, high tides, and also kettle areas will overflow and low-lying areas.
Next one.
So maybe we should say something about flooding.
Next point.
What's the next one? Sorry.
yeah. The next, it's okay. The next point is sea level rise will increase coastal flooding that will impact waterfront facilities and change the ecological function and visual character of coastal marshes and mudflats.
You know,
Maybe in
just to
addition-
your point, the one above it, you could also add and flooding, because that's
That's it.
happened in other places other than coastal.
Because it happens inland too. We get flooding and, yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We also might want to say impact waterfront facilities and something about the housing point.
Right,
Facilities and properties?
Yeah.
right, that's good.
So these are just challenges, okay.
Yeah, these are the challenges that we have to handle. Okay, the next point is sea level rise will continue and it will exacerbate saltwater intrusion into the aquifer in low-lying coastal areas of the island.
Challenge.
It's just a challenge. And
No
then.
idea what to do about that.
No, it's just a challenge.
It's just going to be a challenge. And then the last challenge that we have listed here is that more stringent requirements set by the New York State have made controlled burns to combat ticks and invasive plant species nearly impossible. Current methods have been costly and largely ineffective to date.
It's so nice to have a little test area, just two adjoining.
Well, I mean, part of it too is the increase in development. We're all so close to our neighbors. We don't have a lot of vegetative buffer on our properties anymore, which makes it really hard to do a controlled burn because you need space.
A lot of it is time. There's right temperature and weather conditions, it's the right time of year to do it. And now the big change from what's told to me is it has to be planned so far out in advance. It requires so many resources, which cost money, that if you can't plan a burn 4 months in advance, talking to, other people at the Nature Conservancy, and the last time they did it, I forget the exact number, they lost, over $10,000 because the weather that entire week where they were planning was not suitable for a burn instead of, and that's a state requirement. And then after that, it's like,
We gave up our burn team in 2008.
yeah, and the fire department has lost their brush hog and some of their equipment. It's not impossible, it's just, there's more layers that make it more challenging. I know there are individuals in the island that are highly qualified in doing it, are trying to work.
I mean, here in New York, here on Long Island and across New York, we don't have a burn team. Nature Conservancy burns in other places, because of resources and whatever. But it is true, the timing and resources, and it just, you just get to this one little window of time. And it's,
And then to
yeah.
have it be successful, you have to do it multiple times. So
Yeah.
all that Sean just said, plus the scheduling again, 2 or 3 times, that's what's not.
Instead, we just spray everything with God knows what.
And then we end up in this problem.
I mean, I don't know if I want to say this out loud. So our new conservation and stewardship manager was from a burn team in Florida, and she would love to bring fire back here. But that is something yet to, to be decided on. There's lots to consider,
She's an
so.
expert in invasive plant species as
Yes.
well. I love, like I mentioned before, I'd love to, once we flesh out this a little bit more, get this out to some of the experts that we have on the island.
Right, that's,
We'll have a lot of great feedback.
All right, goals and objectives.
I really don't like this one.
The first one?
Yeah,
Um,
should be 10.
yeah.
That's,
All right, so the first objective is all wastewater effluent on Shelter Island discharged into the aquifer will be at a maximum of 19 milligrams per liter. So that's 19 milligrams per liter is the county standard for an IA
Yeah.
system for nitrates.
yeah, for nitrates, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that explained above?
I think we do talk about it above.
But
So that-
should it be a little more clarified in here as per, you know,
Yeah,
as
that would be helpful.
Because the healthy level for drinking is no more than 10, and that's probably going to be lowered.
Yeah, I think it's not clear if you don't.
Right, that's like a hanging, yeah, it's like a hanging chad here.
I would also add in there, what's the timeline on this?
Yeah, so that's actually something that we need as a town to establish. So that might be a really good action item is develop a, I guess, what would you call it, a wastewater remediation plan for the island? Something that has timelines. I mean, the ground and surface water management plan has a whole list of objectives and when that need to be hit, and they tried to do a timeline, but at this point it's outdated because no one's addressed it. So we can
We also have emerging PFAs, and we don't have anything about them in this. Maybe we should not
They're mentioned-
worry about milligrams, but really talk about potable water levels that are safe.
Safe.
It's more general, but rather than be specific, because we don't know what's coming down the pipe and what
Right.
people then require.
That's, exactly, that's,
That's sort of captured in two, but you could make it more specific.
Yeah.
John, what is PFOA?
Emergency, you know, the plastics, there's all these other forever chemicals that don't go away, they don't change when they reach the environment,
Teflon firefighting foams,
those type of things.
but then now they're in everything.
we're suggesting in goals that we incorporate some of the testing we spoke about earlier and make it the goals and objectives, that we know what we have. See that different parts of the island know what we have,
Right.
We state what the
rather than move to the,
were, and we're trying to move to 19.
Yeah,
Because
so
you don't really
let's
know
do.
what the where you're starting from.
Right.
50. But if you know safe water only occurs at 10, why would you be polluting your
Because if you
aquifer?
had an old system and you read it and you said, oh, I'm at 40 or 50, I'm really supposed to be at 19.
But why would 19 be considered good when you can get, when you have to drink it?
Put it in there.
What's safe?
10,
Less than
Well,
10.
10 is like.
And the goal should be 10, but it should be on an appropriate timeline.
yeah.
Well,
That's not really-
here's the trick. It's not realistic that you're going to put 10 milligrams per liter into the ground. No matter, unless you do a wastewater treatment plant, you will have more than 10 milliliters of nitrates going into the ground. So it's not achievable at this point in time. It may be in the future. So
And not too
long-term, that would be awesome. But in the near future, it's not a realistic goal.
So if it came out of the system and you scrubbed it through the plant material, or plants, wood chips, whatever the system is at the end, then you can reduce it down further.
right,
But we're not.
That's just what's going in, that's not necessarily what you're drawing out, it's just gonna be diluted down
Correct,
and everything.
exactly.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true, but I just,
That's right.
I think might be helpful for all these chapters is in the beginning is have like a little table of acronyms. So if you're going to use things like DOH and
yeah.
WQ, whatever, have like a definition section, just a box that tells people what those things.
They should be spelt out the first time,
First time, right,
Yeah,
and then
parentheses what the abbreviation is, that would do too.
that would, yeah.
but yeah, I agree, that's
There's so
probably like a
many.
glossary or something too.
Yeah, there's so many that. It's just- And there are a couple of WQs.
How many thousands of pages you want?
Exactly. And that's where our consultants are going to be godsends. All right, so this is how I've adjusted this one. It says all wastewater from traditional septic systems on Shelter Island will be upgraded to nitrogen-reducing septic systems that discharge wastewater into the aquifer at a maximum of 19 milligrams per liter.
Can we put hopefully within the next 10 years? Oh, no, hopefully it's probably wrong.
I think we need to put a timeline on it,
Yeah.
Timeline, yeah.
Yeah,
or it's not a goal. I mean,
isn't, right?
not everything needs a timeline, but something like this, when you're
Right,
talking
thought a
about.
10-year plan, right?
All these, the same thing for water and drinking. I mean, we have to have timelines.
So I thought that somewhere along the way, all of our goals and objectives or action things were gonna have some kind of like,
Yes.
Yeah.
this is all gonna become like a chart or
Yes.
timeline kind of thing.
So Noah, we'll leave you to puzzle that out and then, it's sort of a timeline as we get to the sort of centralized action plan that we're planning on, right? You can work
Yeah.
on timelines and then have something to look at.
Yeah, I think the plan was to put together a matrix of all these kind of
Right.
recommendations with timeframes, kind of general, but we can be as specific as you want, but we can certainly put in, what's a priority or what can be achieved in the kind of short term, medium and long term, where short term might be that, 1 to 2 or 3 years, medium 3 to 5 years, and long term 5 to 10 years, that sort of thing.
Yes.
And then I think it's important to list the kind of responsible party.
Yes.
Because sometimes it might seem obvious, but it's not, usually it might be, whether it's the town board, but there might be partners like, Department of Public Works or, private entity, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or different committees too.
Committees, yeah.
Great.
And so we can actually make that an action item, is for the town to develop a plan for helping to implement these and to move forward in this. So that could be an action item.
Plus, I noticed right below, we have drinking water action items. There's like 9 million action items that are broken into different sections, so we don't necessarily have to get them all in this one.
Right.
Right.
So these are just the goals and objective parts. So these are more overarching, and then they'll get. So the second one is to ensure that all Shelter Island residents have ready access to drinking water that meets all applicable local, state, and federal standards. So that is potable. Number 3 is protect and monitor the upper glacial aquifers' quality and quantity of water to support the drinking water needs of the island residents without the need for off-island water.
So these, by the way, are their objectives, not necessarily recommendations.
Right.
Because for recommendations, you need something that is kind of actionable.
Actionable.
So just, so we'd want to kind of identify specific things that the town can do to kind of advance those ideas.
Yeah, and those are all below pages. And then the other goal is to protect surface waters surrounding Shelter Island from being negatively impacted by human activity. So reduce pollution in the near shore. And then the last one is reduce the population of ticks and other invasive species to the maximum extent possible in order to promote a safe and healthy environment. So those are some goals. And then the next step will be the action.
I mean, do you want to add something, as I suggest here, just something about preserving the environment or restoring it to some kind of healthy ecosystem balance? Or
We've lost a lot of marshland. We haven't talked about putting anything back.
Right, restoring.
Restoring, inside Dickerson Creek. Gardner's Creek. I don't know, in the harbor, anything in there?
Some of that is.
Some sort of environmental restoration plan.
Habitat.
All kinds of runs with dredging and kind of getting flow to operate better in there.
Yeah.
Right.
In all those places.
It also goes with kind of improving the water quality so that the plantings and the things you put in can survive. So there needs to be a more comprehensive plan for that, absolutely. Okay.
Who is that?
Which one?
Who would
do
be in
that?
charge of that
Who
plan?
would, right.
The CAC.
The CAC, yeah,
The conservative.
conservation
So would
advisory.
they start that
We can task them with it, absolutely.
as a project?
Preserve and restore.
I think
That we can put that.
they're one of the few committees that does have their chart.
They do have it.
Yeah,
From the
very
state,
from
I
the
think
state.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
I had Chris Pickrell from Cornell to come over and look at Gardner's and Dickerson. And then he wanted to put something together, so.
And there's some funding that is a WQI, water quality improvement, appropriate use of the funds.
Okay. Action items. So it's almost 8 o'clock. How are people feeling? Do we want to dig into these today, or do we want to try to do them at the next meeting? How do you want to?
There are so many, maybe we should hear the public, see if there are public comments.
Are these
Hold it.
imported from the water plan or something like that?
Yeah, a lot of these are from the water plan, the ground surface water management plan, and other plans that have been developed around here. Because they're broken down into, this is why it's very water heavy, because it's groundwater action items, drinking water action items, surface water action items, and then wastewater action items. And I think the reason why it ended up water heavy is because everyone is so very into water. And so there's definitely a dearth of ecological
Almost
action
as bad.
items. There are.
There's 37 of them, and a couple of them are pretty controversial. I mean, there's no way we're gonna do this tonight.
That's what I was just thinking. So what,
I'd like to suggest that we hear from the public,
Yes.
because the public's here, and then we come back at our next meeting to really give this its due diligence.
And may I also add, on number 3, the Heights has indicated that it is not interested in participating in any, I think we heard from that from one of these, from Stella.
okay,
But that should be checked.
yeah, we'll follow up with Stella.
I think they've said that they're not interested in.
No, that's not what I get. Wendy, your point though, in goals and objectives, promote habitat preservation and restoration. So that, I'm trying to type something in. It's bigger than water.
Yeah, to restore it to a healthy ecosystem or
Okay,
something
so
along
that-
that lines.
right.
I mean, or to preserve, or
So-
probably restore it to a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think we've lost it.
So I'm going to go to the public in a moment, but what I want to just kind of task everybody with is to really dig into all the action items and to come up with some that are more, also look at the 94 plan. Like I'll resend out the 94 action items so you can look at those and look at these and kind of really dig into them. And then next time, that's what we'll start with. It's just all the action items for this chapter. That being said, I'm going to go to the public. Anybody have questions, comments? Anyone in the audience there? Any hands on Zoom? Pam Demarest?
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Hi,
Great
Pam.
topic for tonight. I just want to make a note in this that the only aquifer that Shelter Island draws its water from is the upper glacial aquifer. So bringing in the fact that you have the Lloyd aquifer and the Magathy aquifer has no relationship to Shelter Island, and I think that should be stricken from the record. It's
Good
rather
edit.
confusing. You
Good
know,
edit.
we're on the sole source aquifer, and that is the only source of water on the Shelter Island is the upper glacial. Now,
As long as it's made clear that people can't be drilling into those deeper layers, which some people have a fantasy that they can.
But we've had some people who have, and then they're very disappointed when it's all solved.
Just to make sure there's that
Yeah.
delineation.
that could kind of pull into the geothermal systems too that have been discussed. And I don't know how we look into that as far as the natural resources go. The other thing is that Suffolk County Department of Health does have a website that shows violations of water systems, supply systems on the island for certain commercial properties, I will say, and there have been violations of E. coli, bacteria, and that kind of thing. I think we need to look into what the commercial people are doing with their water systems. There are a few of them around. I think that's really important to take a look into those violations that have happened over the course of the couple of years and how they've been resolved. What are the owners of these commercial establishments doing to resolve their problems? That's definitely an issue. I also want you to know that I did put together a map of Shelter Island, and I will share it with you. I had some time this week to put it together, and I put the properties, just the buildings, not with any personal information about exactly which parcel it is, but I layered that on top of the nitrogen map from 2020, the one that's been put out by PO and his wastewater treatment thing. And I think that you might be amazed at how many properties on Shelter Island have a nitrogen problem. They are in the red. And oddly enough, when you look at this, and I'm going to tell you, when you look at it carefully, and I will send it to you all, in some cases, there's actually a purple section right in an area where it's completely red, which to me indicates that was an IA system that went in at some point. That one property in the center doesn't have a nitrate problem, and yet the 6 around it do. So I think it's very telling about what is the situation with the nitrogen problem on Shelter Island. And I think it's also a way to alert people in these neighborhoods about, hey, look at this map. Is your parcel on this map? Maybe you want to get your water tested. It's sort of a way to keep an anonymity to that. And maybe suggest that, you know, to the homeowners, hey, you know, you're in this red section and you might want to get your water tested. And maybe that will help, that will promote them to investigate changing over to an IA system.
I'd love to see that map.
Yeah, the other thing I'm concerned about is I'm not really sure where the information is coming from on the pharmaceutical problems in the water systems. I don't see any reference to any good scientific data proving that people have problems with pharmaceuticals in their water. I haven't found anything from Suffolk County and the PFO.
The county tests that on every water test that they do on the island. And they have substantial data on that. If you look at our wells, the town 13 wells, they all have that data in there.
Yeah.
Okay, Greg. Okay, that's helpful to take a look at. But yeah, that's about basically just what I have for tonight. It's a very hot topic, obviously very important to everyone on Shelter Island. And I think that there is a lot of very good data out there from Suffolk County. There's a lot of good data from the Peconic Estuary Partnership and the DEC, who basically regulates our water on Shelter Island. You know, the DEC owns our water. I mean, this came up in the discussion with the West Neck water system that, you know, just got taken over by Suffolk County Water Authority. And they said, you know what, DEC owns the water. So I think that something in this chapter needs to make reference to that the DEC basically is in charge of whatever happens with the water on Shelter Island. So they're the biggest regulatory agency involved in water quality and quantity on Shelter Island.
I don't know.
You know, just a few thoughts for the evening, but thanks for your time.
Thank you, Pam.
One thought I was just gonna say, I wonder, Pam, you know, once we get that map, if we do layer on top of your map, the IA systems that have been built, because I think it was mentioned before that we have data for that.
That'd be great.
I don't know if it would show anything, but if it did, it would be interesting to see.
The only challenge is the underlying accuracy of the red blotches on that map is really questionable.
Right.
And it's not always based on true well data, or the well data is so ancient, it's not appropriate. So I think it's a wonderful idea, but I think it would be great if we had a better map that really showed the red splotch, those true limitations as opposed to what's being indicated.
And some of those purple dots in the middle of the red dots are kettle holes. It's kettle hole impact where you have a lot of surface waters percolating in and really pushing the less clean water to the side. So you do have these spots of cleaner water interspersed. It's not the most accurate, but
well, I'm talking about something that I'm talking about something like on Jasper Road. There's a house on Jasper Road that seems to be clear. It's perfectly purple. So, you know, there are properties in the center of town that show that they do have clean water from their wells. I'd be happy to, if I can get the data on the IA systems, I'd be happy to add that to the layer, Noah. You know, I just need to know where to get the data on the systems and I can add it on to as another layer to that.
And I think a map like that might be helpful if we just made clear that this is not intended to be a site specific kind of assessment. You know, this is just to understand general trends and help to understand, you know, areas that are experiencing the issues most severely.
Yeah, precisely. That's why I chose to not use it with the tax parcel ID numbers on it. It just shows the buildings are here, and if you know that that's your building, you know you may have a problem. I just think it will help promote people to put in IA systems should they be needed.
all right, cool, thank you. Anybody else? Anyone in the audience? Stephen Jacobs?
Hi, just two brief comments. First, on the wastewater treatment plant, it seems as though, to throw the skunk on the table, so to speak, what's going on is that the town board, having failed to convince much of the public or the school board to support the Lombardo system, is now seeking the backing of CPAC. And I would respectfully suggest that you folks not take the bait and just simply deal with the plethora of other issues you need to deal with. In terms of the endorsement of public water, and in particular treating the February 2020 water management plan as gospel, a couple of comments. One, although I have great personal respect for a number of the people that were involved in putting that plan together, the town board has let it gather dust for roughly 3 years. There's really been no robust discussion of it. And I cannot imagine anything more controversial on Shelter Island than a plan to pipe literally from Shell Beach to Real Point. And while the action plan gives lip service in one place to public input, in particular number 19, where public will exists, install public water supply and distribution systems, it's clear what the overall bent is, particularly looking at item 22, which is to create a time-phased master plan for public water utility service to the remainder of Shelter Island. So that is something I think deserves a full airing and debate, including perhaps getting some of the people involved in the plan back to make presentations to you, to make presentations to the public, and anyone else who wants to weigh in. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Kim? You're muted, Kim.
Okay, first I would like to just reaffirm everything that Stephen Jacobs said. Second, when he refers to the 2020 Bible that you attached to this chapter, I totally agree that it shouldn't be the Bible. And in fact, I refer once again to the letter that was written by the Shelter Island Association in April of last year, which asked the CPAC and the task force to put water in the place that it should be, as in the 2021 survey, as the very most important thing to the 1,000 people that were surveyed. Now, if it is the most important thing, I think the consultants should take the idea of giving it its own chapter. And there should be, as requested in the letter of 1 year ago, a holistic plan that is expert-driven. And quoting from the letter, it's developed by independent, qualified, unconflicted experts, not town board members or citizens, however well-meaning. So I asked the consultants here tonight, is there anyone on your staff who is a actually scientifically credible person like Dr. Chris Gobler? And the reason I bring up Dr. Gobler's name is because, you know, he found out some stuff and he did an independent study. Okay, so that's a couple comments. You know, I have a whole bunch that won't fit in my 3 minutes, but everything flows from water, including zoning and land use. We do have some protections in our code. The public has spoken recently on protections in our code. And I don't hear much support for those protections in this plan so far. So what we are facing is a weakening of the wetlands code very soon. And I brought this up on the governance chapter last week, where the town board is going to lateral this to an appointed board. Everyone on the conversation tonight, especially Sean Clark, has highlighted the huge importance of Shelter Island environment and ecology. And where does it start? At the edge of the water. I don't know what else I can say on this, but you're about ready to see action by a town board that I hope would be prevented by the comprehensive plan that you have been entrusted with drafting. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Kim. Lori?
So we.
Hi, I just have a few comments. One is on page 9 under Shelter Island's drinking water. There's a statement that says, talks about 3 community supply wells on Shelter Island, but then it says, it talks about smaller ones. And it says those smaller community water supplies are privately owned and serve only one individual parcel. Well, I can think of 2 off of my head without even trying that that's not correct. One is Wood Street because it has a private, it's a privately owned well, but it serves multiple properties on Bridge Street. And another one that I can think of off the top of my head without thinking about it is Montclair. There's a private well in the Montclair area that serves 4 or 5 different properties. So the question is, how many more of these small or private wells serve multiple properties that are out there? So there's more of them than what this states. So that statement is not true. The other thing that I would ask, and maybe Meg knows this question, in 2020 and 2021, there was no engineering intern that kept up the data on GIS for the IA systems that were installed within the town. Now, I know you've done that separately on the IA systems installed by Shelter Island Sand and Gravel, but there's been other installers that have installed IA systems on Shelter Island. Now, maybe in 2022, the building department or somebody engineering, had gone back over the last 2 years, but I'm not sure that data has been kept up to date. It certainly wasn't for 2 years that it didn't get.
You're correct, Lori. Yeah, no, that hasn't been kept up to date. We've been keeping all the septic registries separate so they could be uploaded, but we need to get someone with the GIS experience to do that.
Right. So that map that's posted on the town website is not correct because that was from when John Cronin was town engineer, which was 2019.
Yeah, there have been far more installs that are on that map. So hopefully we can get someone to update it soon. One of the action items I wanted to put in the governance chapter was to get a GIS expert, either part-time or consulting, to help us keep everything up to date because we have a lot of data coming in and we need to use it more effectively.
Yeah, because that was something that I had tried or asked for that didn't get done for one reason or another. That wasn't allowed to get done. Anyway, those are a couple of my comments. I have a few, but I will send those in an email. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
We're right on the chapter, Lori, too, at the bottom, if that's easier, I don't know.
All right.
Comment.
Kathleen?
Hey, guys, thank you. I just wanted to share a point about the connection between open space and water quality. And just using the numbers from both the natural resources chapter and the housing chapter, the number of houses on the island has grown by 47% in the last 20 years, and the population's grown by 11%. And what that means is the remaining 834 vacant lots, according to your document, if we grow development at the same pace, will be gone by 2030, so in less than 10 years. So one action item I would suggest, based on comments I heard here tonight, would be to prioritize land preservation, since the actual amount of land preserved is a very small percentage, less than 2% when you exclude Mishomic. And specifically in the nearshore areas, that being the most vulnerable and the most important to land preservation and to water preservation and to preventing future pollution, would be to take those 834 acres that are still vacant residential plots and figure out how many of them are in the nearshore overlay and move expeditiously as a priority in this plan to preserve those through the purchase of development rights. Take those off the marketplace.
Why just development rights? Why not just buy the property?
Fine, if that's fine, buy the property.
Okay, I thought
Preserve them in any way possible.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know how many of them, the 834 are in the near shore, but that ought to be a fact you guys could find.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody? All right. Anybody in the room have anything? No?
Next meeting, we are just focusing on this chapter, or are we moving on as well?
Moving on is what we hope.
Yeah, we'll try to do both, but we're gonna start by focusing on this chapter, finishing this up so we can get it to the consultants. So definitely dig into your action items, make recommendations, changes on this document, and then I'll try to review it and clean it up before the next meeting in the SharePoint. And then we can really discuss the points that are gonna be contentious.
As we consider it, the comments, will we be able to look at the comments from tonight put in? Or is that too much? I guess we have 2
Well,
weeks.
we were adding comments in the SharePoint document as we went along, so the comments that were added tonight are already in there. And then people can go after the meeting and add their own comments so that we have a basis for discussion. And then also look at the 94 plan and the action items recommended there for some of the more natural environment kind of recommendations. And I can resend that link to the chart that has the 94, the 2008 current. So do that before the next meeting. And that'll be our goal. So that, and then what was the other chapter we were going to do next time? Was it housing?
Housing.
And housing. So if we finish this, we'll start with housing, but not overly hopeful that we'll get to housing, but we'll see what we can achieve. Okay?
What is the date of the next meeting? I'm sorry.
Good question, Noah.
15th.
May 15th.
So is the plan to possibly separate water from the rest of natural resource, that these will be two different?
Well, I think the goal will be to really just focus on our action items, and then the consultants are going to sort it out as it fits in the chapters as they've rearranged and reorganized things. So really just to make sure that we have the action items that we see as important documented. All right.
Yeah, I mean, just, for that, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah,
We're flexible, and we totally understand that water quality is a very important issue. We're not trying to be separate. We thought that natural resources and water quality just made sense as a combined chapter because they're so interrelated. The preservation of natural resources has its own merit, but also, water quality, to improve water quality, you really need to preserve those areas. And infrastructure, really, a lot of it has to do with green infrastructure. So, instead of calling it natural resources and infrastructure, we could call it natural resources and water quality, if that helps to kind of bring water to the forefront. But that was just our suggestion because we thought that it made the most sense from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, so that'll be the plan moving forward for next time.
I'll make a motion to
Second.
end the meeting.
Well done, Sean.
All in favor?